I'm really excited about this particular presentation. It's building off of last session, which was 2 weeks ago. So if you haven't seen last session, it was about how do you play to your strengths to help in your recovery and restoration. And that's very important to know the mechanisms, the brain mechanisms and how you're wired so that you can consciously do that. We all know that life is pulling us along right now. There's a lot of things we can't control. But what we'll learn today in the 6 principles of post-traumatic growth is exactly how can you control your thinking and your outcomes so that you can get stronger through this period. So what is post-traumatic growth? Post-traumatic growth came out of research done by Dr. Martin Seligman on soldiers that came back from combat situations and who experienced trauma. You may not know that up to 15 to 20% of soldiers who experience combat duty come back with some form of trauma, where it creates what we call PTSD, or post-traumatic stress syndrome. And what that is there's a wiring or a triggering in the brain. Your brain has been so impacted. Think of trauma as a physical injury to the brain. We know concussions do that. We also have emotional injuries, shock. And that shock creates a brain pattern, and the brain attempts to protect itself. And so what it does is it creates this highly vigilant mode. It's called a default mode network. And there's actually a triangle in the top of your brain called the ring of fire. So if you see a brain scan, especially brain scans done by Dr. Amen, you will see those who have trauma have this ring. And it's this firing pattern where a thought or an image or a memory gets trapped in this network, and it goes round and round. One of the challenges people have who experience post-traumatic stress syndrome is that when they see something or they get triggered, it takes them back to that moment in time as though it were happening again. So it's like they stay in this box, this mental box that they can't get out. And that's why it's so difficult. The interesting thing in this research is that a small percentage came back stronger. And that's what's called post-traumatic growth. And in researching these soldiers, they came up with 5 principles. We've added one more that's especially relevant right now during COVID. So to review what those 6 are is, first of all, it's a positive mindset. It's playing to your strengths, which we developed a bit 2 weeks ago. Your circle of 5 vital relationships that are within your circle: sleep and physical wellness, meaning and purpose. So we're going to focus primarily in this workshop on number 1, the positive mindset, number 2, meaning and purpose, and then the ability to have daily accomplishment and measure it. So I'd like to pause and give you a couple of minutes, a minute or two, to reflect and think and rank these in terms of which do you think is your strongest attribute and which is your least strongest attribute. Now, mine is the positive mindset, and I'll show you more about where I come up with that and why that is true for me. And the important thing is that no matter where you are with this, you may be struggling, and many are. You may feel isolated, many are. So that's the circle of 5 that you may not have in place. You can build on your strongest and then expand to the others. So that's a key strategy. I try to inventory when people are struggling. I have them rank these 6, and then we begin with the one that's the strongest. Then we build up to the next strongest, and then we build up to the next strongest. That's a key strategy for us. Now, where are you feeling stress? Right now, I'm coaching over 60 individuals. Prior to COVID, I coached maybe 4 or 5 at any given time. But the demand is high, and for various reasons that you can imagine. but I've been keeping track at the things that are creating stress for people in this uncertain time, this time of disruption. Let's pick which one of these you identify with the most, or if I don't have it up here, you can add in chat so we have a fuller inventory on the kinds of things that are really creating the largest degree of stress. So in talking to people, I'm hearing comments like, I'm not feeling productive. I'm spinning my wheels. I'm unclear about where I should focus my energy. The start and stop and start again is draining me. I can't tell if I'm making any difference at all. I feel isolated. I need to have some human contact. The conflict that we had in our teams, which was manageable, now becomes more exposed as we're distributed and we don't have that rhythm and that interpersonal connection. I feel disconnected from my manager. I just had a coaching session earlier where that was the key issue, and we talked about strategies on how to help the manager engage in that career support, career development. I'm not sure about my future here. Several are saying, I feel stalled in my career. In another coaching session, someone said, I'm just having to put things on hold till next summer. That's really draining for you. And it's disappointing to have to come to that if you were moving forward towards an opportunity that you had. The back-to-back virtual meetings like this. And then I miss the office interaction. I miss feeling part of a group. My particular area of stress are the back-to-back Zooms. And we talked about in the last session that doing this generates more calorie requirements than just physical interactive meetings. A normal day, your brain will consume about 28% of your calories. In this environment, it's consuming 40 to 45%. So if you feel drained at the end of the day, this is one reason why. Here are my strengths, and I've color-coded them in the Core Clarity system. The Core Clarity system is a way of taking the Clifton strengths, the 34 strengths, and putting them into 4 key buckets. Those buckets I consider to be like languages. Those are instinctive and intuitive, or like energy fields. And so on the top part of the system, there's a circle, and in the top half of the circle, there's a left quadrant, which are the relationship strengths that are in blue. These are the intuitive strengths around the nonverbal elements that make relationships work. It's also an energy field. On the upper right-hand side are the motivational strengths. These are intuitive around finding potential and being attracted to ways to help make that potential real. And those are magenta. And notice in my top 7 here, I have no magenta strengths. Then the bottom, the internal, those are the strengths that are happening internally, where I'm inside my mind and I'm thinking and doing. The green, the cognitive, is in the bottom left-hand quadrant. And then the action, the things that initiate activity or get it done, are in the bottom right. So why do I mention these and raise these? Well, your strategy for post-traumatic growth will be different than mine. Your place of recovery will be different than mine. Your way of approaching and solving the problems will be different than mine. So while I'm walking through the basic principles of post-traumatic growth, it's still very tailored to you. So there's not a one-size-fits-all. You have to play to your strengths through this period of time. One of the things we explored in the last webinar is how certain things will engage my strengths. And when I'm engaging or triggering the positive side of my strength, it's releasing dopamine. Or if I get into that deep flow, it's endorphins. Those are rejuvenating. If they're constrained or I'm unable to use them, or there's friction, that then creates cortisol, which is stress. So the feeling side also gives you an indicator or a barometer of whether you're playing to your strengths or not. So looking at your current roles, some of you felt very engaged in what you're doing. Your achievers were getting things done and accomplishing projects, and now projects are on hold. So one of the strategies we'll talk about is how do you redirect the energy or the engagement that achiever strength needs in a different way. We know that if people are tapping into all of their strengths on a daily basis, then they're feeling rejuvenated. They're feeling a sense of satisfaction. They're feeling a sense of progress. We just need to know how to navigate this. So again, these are my strengths, and I will relate back to my strengths in some of my strategies as an example on how you might look at your strengths and look at similar situations. My number one strength is strategic. I typically am able to very quickly figure out which is the best way to go. It's instinctive and it's intuitive. My next strength is learner, naturally curious. And so I can learn and ramp up so new things, novel situations stimulate my learner. My next is achiever, that checklist mode, getting things done, feeling that sense of accomplishment. That drives me, but also it's a need. I have to feel like I'm progressing through the day on my checklist. And I'll show you right here. Here's my daily checklist. And then I've got my yesterday checklist. Everybody has a different way of feeling or managing or focusing your energy to make progress. This is one of mine. Connectedness, that's my strength that sees kind of the hidden connections between people or situations. It's the strength that allows me to write the kind of books I do that deal with very complex projects, but go from the realm of capital projects, workplace culture and engagement, health and well-being, education engagement, stress and education, and even faith-based. There's a common thread through all of those that my connectedness helps me see. And so that common thread is humans addressing complex situations and problems they're stuck in. That's the common thread. So with that, I can look at almost any situation through that lens, and my connectedness helps me see that common thread, but also it helps me bring lessons in from the different areas. Relator, that is my natural instinct to want to give a person the benefit of the doubt, to build trust, be authentic until proven otherwise. So I like going deeper with a few. And so now you can begin to see combinations like relator and achiever, working with others to accomplish things together. That's part of my wiring. Input is my desire to really learn and become an expert. That's that deep dive, collect everything I need to know on a certain topic, become that subject matter expert very rapidly. And then the seventh strength is responsibility. That sense of ownership, that loyalty, that follow through. So now you have a little bit of a window of the natural, instinctive, intuitive ways, the things I naturally do best and enjoy most. Now we'll look at how does that help me throughout my journey. So let's begin with my story going back to 1999. 1999 was my pivot year. This was the year that changed everything for me. It was the most difficult year that I can remember. This was the year that I moved our family back from Washington, D.C. to Texas. I was given a role as the vice president of sales and marketing for a large furniture distributor in Texas. And they were growing at a rate that would probably double in the next 3 to 5 years. Now, when I came back, I had part of that growth as part of my compensation. I was 45 years old at the time, and the compensation plan was to be able to retire by age 55. And as you can see, that did not happen. What I did not know, what nobody could have known, is the dot-com crash. Our company had 70% of its revenue involved in 5 major accounts. 4 of them were technology. 2 were internet, 2 were telecom companies, and then the 5th one was a large bank. And so what happened in a short period of time was the dot-com crash, and the bank, the one that I thought might be the anchor, was purchased by Chase, and then all the standards shifted. That happened within a 6-month period of time. We lost 70% of our revenue in that time. And with that, compensation changed and my whole life changed. One day I came into the office and I found that my email wasn't working. Now I called the IT person, his name's Walt, and I said, Walt, can you help me with my email? And he just said, you need to go talk to the owner. And I won't mention his name, but so I did. The owner was very antsy, tense. I could see that there was a problem here. And what he said was, we don't need a VP of sales, we need sales. He ripped up my 10-year contract and said, you've got 2 choices. You can leave today, which I think they were anticipating I would do because my email was shut off, or you can go back into sales. Now, I went from a very comfortable 6-figure income that allowed me to buy a nice home in a neat suburb called Southlake, Texas. And I was in that middle level executive world. I had the largest mortgage I ever had. We just enrolled our kids in school. And I go from that 6-figure income down to a $30,000 draw overnight. Not only that, is that this happened on a Friday, and I told the owner that I felt I was called here for a purpose. Now I've had a 30-year relationship. Well, it's now a 40-year relationship with that owner. He was a supplier of mine when I was at Southwestern Bell in 1978. Now I'm working for him, so we've known each other for a long time. And in that period of time, now I'm going back into sales. So Friday, I find the news. Monday, I'm back in as a salesperson, sitting in the sales meeting where someone from the warehouse that I promoted into sales was now my boss. Now, part of what allowed me to get through this is part of the post-traumatic strengths or post-traumatic growth, which I will outline later. Now, going through this journey, you can imagine I was trying to find out and get my equilibrium back. Now, part of my foundation, of course, is my faith, and that was a big part of it, but also people like Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is the creator of something called logotherapy, and logotherapy is essentially therapy around meaning. Logos is Greek for meaning, and then we know what the word therapy means. He was a prisoner of war, and he found that when he was in the prison camps, that there were 2 kinds of people: those who died, those who survived. Those who died looked for an escape. They were optimistic in the hopeful or wishful thinking, and they felt like victims. Those who survived found meaning, and so they kept their thoughts, and they controlled their thoughts, and they found meaning in all of the different activities that they were involved in, even the negative activities. So what he found that was in human nature was agency, free will, the ability to choose how you interpret a situation. So number 1, that was key. Now, the next individual that comes into the picture, this is some of the background, is Maslow. We're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But what you may not be familiar with is the source of what that came from. What he discovered about human nature is that we all have an inner sense of what we're capable of, what our potential is. And you know, as a kid, you dreamed and thought of, I'm going to be an astronaut or a nurse or a doctor. There's something inside of you that causes that urge, that sees that potential. And what he said is, what you can become, we're driven that we must become. And so that's where that ladder comes of how we progress. What has to be in place for us to be able to even have the emotional bandwidth to think about that next level of growth. Now we're getting into the more current time frame. Dr. Donald Clifton is a contemporary of Maslow. And what he is the father of is strengths psychology. Now, strength psychology is the Clifton strengths. And it's built on the research that these are natural, instinctive. So there's something intrinsic in terms of the motivation. In other words, you do them just for the sense and the feeling, the dopamine and the endorphins you get. There's not an external motivation like compensation or recognition or any of that. These are valuable to you in and of themselves. And having interviewed more than 2 million individuals over a 30-year period of time, and these individuals are considered to be happy and successful, he started finding traits. And then this was boiled down to 34 measurable traits that are rank ordered. And these traits correlate to the brain. And they correlate in the sense that they're your strongest neural connections. I call them synaptic clusters. They're your most dense synaptic clusters, and where when your brain fires, that's the most instinctive, natural, and energizing phase. So now we're connecting the strengths, the intrinsic motivation, with Maslow and with Viktor Frankl. And then the new piece to the equation, the piece that I discovered in the 1990s, is Dr. Martin Seligman's work, who is a protege of Donald Clifton. Both of them were presidents of the American Psychological Association. Donald Clifton founded Gallup, so we're familiar with Gallup and what it does. Martin Seligman is at the University of Pennsylvania. And what he found and built off of the strengths is the role of positive psychology, and this is where we'll get into mindset. His initial research was on something called learned helplessness, that when people lose that agency or that feeling or ability that they can change their conditions or control their outcomes, again, tied to Viktor Frankl, then they begin to develop a mindset that it's not worth doing anything. They just kind of die inside. And so he's the father of positive psychology as part of the solution above that. How do you get beyond feeling a victim of your circumstances and get out of what's called this learned helplessness? And this then led to research with the soldiers and therefore the post-traumatic growth. So I'm going to camp here on positive mindset for a little bit. Now, this happens to be my strongest attribute. Remember, I asked you to rank the 6. And I've got proof. I've got a brain scan from the Amen Clinic that shows that persistence and resilience it's wired. It's hardwired in my brain. Now, there's a lot of things that I don't necessarily do well. But this is one thing that's hardwired, is that I just don't give up. I think I got that trait from my mom. My mom, we used to call her the pit bull. She just did not let go. And subsequently, when I got married, my wife picked up that nickname for me. I'm just relentless on things, and I can be hit with a 2x4. I can take setbacks. I can utterly fail and brush it off and get back again. And it really is around the mindset. So there, you can develop the mindset. And one of the top philosophers of the current era is Rocky Balboa in terms of this. So it's not about getting knocked down. It's how many times you can get up after you get knocked down. If you told your toddler every time that they fell down on their knees, if you said, that's so bad, I don't think you're ever going to be able to walk, they'd soon give up. But toddlers know that this is the adventure. They will get up and fall down, get up and fall down. We need some of that toddler mentality when it comes to hard times, because during hard times, we have no precedence. We don't know what we don't know. The other current philosopher, Kelly Clarkson, and I know she didn't come up with this quote, but she does have a song, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." So that mantra, when you hit something, when I hit an obstacle, I think, wow, that's going to push me into an area I didn't even realize, something new. So when I hit an obstacle, my first thought is something new for me to examine. And notice it ties to one of my strengths, learner. The next is the ability to reframe what you experience. What is the story that you tell yourself when you hit a setback? In March, when all of my business disappeared for the year, 95% was gone for the entire year. What I thought was, this is the opportunity for me to do something that I've not been able to give much attention to. I can create the studio, virtual content, learn how to do things that I've been admiring and envying how people do this for a long time, but never having the bandwidth to do it. No excuses. Now, I did mourn the loss through March. From March 12, when I started getting pushbacks on dates or cancellations, I was going, shoot, and what's going on? And, what's going to happen to the family? And am I going to go back to 2000 again when I was on my knees? Am I going to go through all that again? But very quickly it was reframe. Here's the opportunity I've been looking for. Closure rituals to move on quickly. You need to bring closure, and that helps you move on. Have some kind of formal ritualization. We do that at funerals. We see somebody's life and we have a process of coming to terms with it. And either it was a great life and we frame it as, wouldn't you like to be more like Sally? Or it wasn't a great life and we say, man, that person's in a better place. But we have this formal process of putting meaning on that hard time to bring closure. If you're not putting meaning on the hard times, what you're going through, to bring closure to it, you're going to stay stuck. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. The disciplined mind, habits, 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 habits. Again, this ties to my strongest attribute. I have habits. I have morning rituals. I have daily, in the middle of the day rituals. I have evening shutdown rituals. And rituals and habits are so important when you don't feel like doing it. My morning routine is 30 minutes of reflection and thought and reading. I do sit-ups, I do push-ups, and then I get into it. I take breaks during the day, and these are true breaks where I don't do anything. I don't look at social media because of the drain. At 4:30 in the afternoon, I shut down and I go hit 30 minutes of tennis balls, 30 to 45 minutes. I come back. We have dinner together as a family, which is great part of the COVID that I'm home. And I wash the dishes. It's my ritual. And then my wife and I have some time to reflect on the day and shut it down. Rituals are so important. Whatever your rituals are, you need rituals when you don't feel like it. If you think exercise is the ritual that you want to start, then think about putting your tennis shoes or your running shoes and your clothes right at the bedside so that when you get up, that's the first thing you see. Without the rituals and habits, you cast off the discipline. And there's an ancient saying that those who cast off discipline perish. So we need that. Visualizing the empathetic future. This is something I learned from Dr. Roizen, and it explained why most heart patients, people who are told, hey, you need a coronary bypass, but more importantly, if you don't change your lifestyle, this coronary bypass isn't going to help you. You're going to die. And the statistics show that only 1 in 9 people actually change their lifestyle, even if it's a change or die mandate. Now, what Dr. Roizen said is that the trouble is that people can't imagine that slow decay of death. And he reframed it. He had a client who was in that condition. He was a young entrepreneur, very successful business person who drank and smoked and ran a hard life, about 45 years of age. And he basically told him, he said, you have the body of a 60-year-old, but how would you like to feel like you're 40 again? The empathetic bridge was first connecting. Well, if this is like 60, that's one connection, but I remember what it was like to feel like 40. I'd love to do that. Dr. Roizen then developed a whole process of helping people calculate what their real age is versus their chronological age. And you can go online and get that assessment. I recommend you do it. Just search for the real age assessment. And he did it in partnership with Dr. Oz Mehmet, and figure that out. The next is let go and forgive. This to me is part of that mindset of bounce back ability. And so like many people, you know, I'm 65, I've been in the workplace for 41, 42 years. I've had people do me wrong. I've had companies do me wrong. I've had bosses do me wrong. And what I've been able to do is let go quickly. Now, my wife, on the other hand, still keeps pictures of those individuals. And if she ever sees them on the road, she might kind of veer over and, oops, have an accident. So my wife is very protective, but at the same time, for me, yes, it hurts. Yes, I looked at what my options were. And in some cases, it could have been legal options. But again, it's close it down, move forward, trust that I'm part of a bigger story. And so these are some of the things that help me bounce back. I'm in a bigger story. And so in hero's journey and in movies, the hero goes through setbacks, but they're on a bigger mission. They're part of a bigger story. Focus on the next thing. This came very clear to me when I did a 10-day wilderness backpack trip with my son in the mountains in New Mexico. And these were grueling mountains. They weren't the 14ers of Colorado, but they were 8,000 to 10,000 feet. And we did 8 of those in 10 days. And it was hot weather. We carried all our supplies. My backpack was about 45, 50 pounds. And that was a grind. So in some days, when we had our longest day, we named it. We said day 8. And we had a little song we made up. But what we did is we focused on the next easy milestone. If we get here, we can take a break. If we get to here, we've got water. If we get to here, we can play a bit. So we focused on the small little milestones, even though we had to do 12 miles that day and it was a grueling 12 miles. We were able to break it into smaller increments. That's important that you look at big things and break it down. It's the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But make sure you're not looking at the whole elephant while you're eating that piece. You just look at the next step in front of you. And then curiosity versus reaction. I learned this as a consultant, especially doing conflict resolution. When you get a setback or somebody does something that hurts or is negative for you, to develop a curiosity mindset. Oh, I wonder. Interesting. How did that happen? Or the 5 whys that Toyota gives you. Why did that happen? And why do you think that happened? And then why did that happen to make that happen? This curiosity mindset is one of your best tools to not get the emotions personally engaged in the challenge or the problem so that you can stay objective. So this is a self-reflection question again, and you can put this into the chat. When you felt most impacted, what was the story that you told yourself? So I'm consulting with, again, 60 people, and some of them share the hurts or the harms or the setbacks or the challenges. And it equates to some of these common things. Some feel it's a form of karma, it's payback. We moved to the city and now I've got everybody in, and I knew it was going to be hard and a sacrifice, but now this is payback for that. Well, it's not. Or worst case thinking, you begin to ruminate and start thinking, and it's called catastrophizing. When you start ruminating about, boy, this could get worse, or thinking of the catastrophe it can become. Blame, the victim game. I could have done that with the company that brought me down and gave me the contract, the owner who gave me the contract, great income, I'm secure. And then within a year of being there in the whole disaster of the economy, I'm now in the worst position I've ever been. I could have played the victim and the blame game. It would have been very easy to do that. Or you can just stay busy. I talk to some of the people I'm coaching and they're busy being busy, but that's not feeding that sense of accomplishment, which is one of the key attributes in post-traumatic growth. That's just numbing. It's a distraction. It's like drinking, or it's like watching television. It's not really producing. And there's a real imperative in these times. Be productive. Even if it's a small little step forward, produce. And then wishful thinking. We saw a lot of this wishful thinking. It'll be over by fall or whatever. And what happens is when you set yourself up in thinking positive thinking, which I'm not a proponent of, positive thinking in the form that we typically see, which is just to convince yourself things will be better. That's not true. It can suck. It can hurt. You can lose a loved one. It can be tragedy. That's not it. And so if you give in to thinking that way, you're setting yourself up for huge disillusionment and depression. These three are elements that I'm not going to spend much time today, but I will in the future webinar. And I'm especially going to focus on sleep and restoration. But here's a couple things you can think about. Who are the 5 people that you can call at 2 a.m. and they would come to your aid? Do you have 5 people that are that close and that tight? If you don't, we know research tells us that you're in jeopardy. Your mental health is in jeopardy. Your best self is in jeopardy. You need 5 people who care enough about you, who give you feedback. Do you have a close friend at work? Gallup shows that people who don't have a close colleague, someone they can confide in at work, are 60% more likely to leave that company than someone who does. These are vital. And again, my relator strength is one of the areas that has helped me with this particular area, and I'll share more about that in the future. Sleep and restoration. Now, I didn't know about that when I went through my period of travail, or the epic of the dark night that I went through. But I discovered this in 2016, and I use tools to help me measure and monitor my sleep quality. You don't know if you've gotten a good night's sleep or not, unless you have some way to indicate your recovery levels. I'm going to give a separate webinar on just that alone and show you why that's the case. And also restoration, taking time, taking days, taking weekends. One of the things I like about what some of the people are doing that I'm coaching, I just got off a coaching session and they've taken a 3-week trip. They're going to take a 3-month trip because they can work from anywhere. They've got a little camper. They're now they live in Austin, but they're now up in Wyoming, in Casper, Wyoming. And they're using this to do some things, but also be productive at work. I love it. And then accomplishment, and when I focus on this topic in a future webinar, we'll look at leading indicators as a key part, and also how to trust the process, having all the structures in for success, the right habits, the right routines, the right mindset, playing to your strengths, getting all that in, and then trusting the process to get results. So we'll talk about some of the traps we fall into when we look at accomplishments. Let's talk about finding meaning. This was the second area that I wanted to camp on for a while in this presentation. So part of finding meaning is looking for something bigger than me and something beyond me. So Viktor Frankl found in his research that man is searching for meaning. That's one of the fundamental aspects that make us human, is that we look for meaning in life, in situations, in relationships. We're meaning makers. It's interesting. I was just talking to a colleague of mine who was commenting that in Kenosha now, with the riots that are happening because of the tragic shooting by the police, that there's lots of riots. And he said, there's no information coming out. They're locking down and tightening up. And what's happening is it's creating greater stress on people and riots. And there's an old adage that I learned from a consultant. There's an acronym called NIMSU. No information, make stuff up. So in ambiguous situations, if you happen to be a leader, for example, you have to give people enough information so that they can put meaning to it and give meaning to what they're doing in the situations. If you don't do that, they will make up their own narrative, and I can promise you it will be a cynical, skeptical narrative around distrust, more likely than it will be, oh, they've got my best interest in mind. I can pretty much tell you that's not the narrative people will come up with. Now, his second element is that life has meaning. So in order for you to have agency, in other words, man searches for meaning, I have free will or agency in finding that meaning. Life in itself has meaning, then I will to mean something. In other words, it's similar to Maslow. What you can become, you must become. In other words, whatever meaning there is, I'm going to drive and strive to find that meaning in life. It's a primal driver that we all have. So when we're in situations that's chaotic, ambiguous, uncertain, those are really difficult times to find meaning. And that's when we have to go beyond ourselves and something bigger to ourselves to look for it. So in these kind of situations, how do you look for meaning? Well, one is develop that curiosity and reframe situations. When I am when I am brought in to deal with conflict on teams, and so it's very confusing and trying to interpret people's versions of, quote, the truth. The tendency is easy to want to take sides because, there's an old ancient saying that when someone makes their case, it's easy to take that side until the other person makes their case. So what I do instead is develop that framework of curiosity, of wondering, why do you feel that way? How did you get to that position? What were the activities or the actions that led to that? But curiosity is a key part of when things don't make sense. Don't try to make sense. Just be in wonderment. Be curious. It's okay. Now, another part of looking for meaning is seeing pressure pushes things to the surface. It exposes things. Stress exposes things. It's interesting. Today, when all that's going on with COVID, with the confusion of social unrest, with the craziness of the politics and the uncertainty, there are certain elements in our society that are taking apocalyptic views of this, end of the world type of things. And so I decided that with all of this, I'm going to go back and look up the meaning of apocalypse. Apocalypso. That's Greek. And what it means is to uncover or expose. So for me, during this time, what's being exposed or uncovered is that, gee, we had an unsustainable approach to work prior to this. We were becoming more unhealthy. Wow, we have, what was chronic and not really seen or noticed. It's like the frog in the boiling pot. If you're only increasing the degree 1 degree at a time, the frog doesn't jump out. But if all of a sudden you drop the frog into a boiling pot of water, they jump immediately. And that's what's happened with COVID. All of a sudden, chronic issues that we weren't addressing have become exposed, and now they're acute issues. Income inequality, healthcare gap, the ability to get taken care of, the governance issue, the ability to make clear decisions from our leaders, the school, the exposing just how unprepared and the kind of experience of the hybrid, again, the income gap, those are all things being exposed during this time, which give us meaning, gives us new purpose to try to rectify or cure or heal some of these wounds that we've got. You can pause and step back to gain perspective. In Ronald Heifetz's book, Leaders on the Line, which talks about transformational leadership or adaptive leadership, one of the key things a leader has to do is what he calls get from the dance floor where all the activity is going on and you're in the middle of trying to avoid bumping into people and keeping up with the rhythm, to getting on the balcony and watching what's going on. We need more time than we ever have to take a day a week. Some people hold a day on the weekend, whether it's Friday to Saturday or Saturday through Sunday, or they might have Monday off. But I've been going back to the practice of just spending the day reading, reflecting, and talking with my wife to process and make meaning on what we're seeing going on in the world and with our friends. If we don't do that, we've been on the treadmill. So that's one of the other things that's been exposed. We've been on the treadmill. We've been reacting to all the things coming. We haven't been responding in a proactive way. Look for growth. Look for signs of growth. That's part of looking for meaning. Growth means something positive is happening. And then practice and express gratitude. The more you practice gratitude, and the research is clear, the more you practice gratitude, the more you see gratitude, and that releases serotonin in your brain in terms of that feeling of well-being. So these are things that help you in looking for meaning. Now, Viktor Frankl talked about how to experience meaning. And one of the ways is actions that are meaningful to others. Work that is meaningful to others. A creative process. Creating this slide deck was meaningful for me. It helped me think through and more clearly understand my past experience and put context around it and understand the journey that I've been on. You can experience something meaningful, experience awe, experience something bigger than yourself or beyond yourself. The Grand Canyon, people who go to the Grand Canyon so often say, wow, that was life-changing. Having the courage, making a difficult choice that you've been putting off, that gives you a sense of meaning. And again, experiencing something bigger or beyond yourself. These are all ways that help you find and put that meaning in place. Now I'm going to walk you through a way to process through the pain of these experiences. And there's a link here you can find, and it's in the Google Doc. And one of the things we found is we worked with an organization called Journeyman Inc. They're in Dallas, Texas. They work with kids that have gone through abusive lives, and they help them learn how to process that through a model. It's called dialectic therapy. We're calling it peer-to-peer support, but it's a form of processing and telling your story. What you'll find in the link is a template we created that goes through my work from home or my quarantine story. And it basically goes through these elements, but it's in a story format. It's a template. It's easy to fill in the blanks. And one of the things that I work with when I'm coaching is I'll ask somebody who's going through a hard time, how did it impact you in terms of just actual things? You know, I lost 20% of my pay. We're living together and we've got one computer. You know, everybody's in the same house. I'm balancing kids and work and all this stuff. So how did it impact you? Now, how does it feel? What's that feel like? What are you feeling? You know, we have to understand and be able to verbalize what that is. So what are you hoping for out of this going forward? What are the hopes going through this? What worries you going forward? Where do you think you're stuck? What's the next step you can take? So one of the things we've developed for managers is taking the story template, taking my work from home or my return to work story. We've got 2 templates, and then we've got one for social tragedies like we've seen on how to tell those stories. But managers who can help and have everybody talk in a safe way and share their story, it's so very powerful. In all of my team workshops, we begin with a version of this to get to know each other. This being able to tell your story is a meaning-making mechanism. Humans are storytelling animals because we put meaning behind things, and there is a structure and format to help work through that. So let's go back to my story. So how did that turn out? Well, as you can tell, as I told you earlier, my income dropped from a nice, healthy, 6-figure income to 30,000 draw. I quickly, in just paying for mortgage, I took out multiple credit cards, and I got very good at rotating debt to just pay interest only on the debt. And I accumulated over $150,000 of debt in the first year of credit card debt. So I went to work. First of all, the positive mindset, my learner strength, new adventure. I need to reinvent myself. My connectedness strength. Connectedness is one of the 2 spiritual strengths that Gallup talks about. It finds meaning, and it's very buoyant on the ups and downs in life. So because of my faith, I was able to see, well, I came down here for a purpose. There is a bigger purpose. Now I can really understand or look for and search for what is that purpose. It doesn't seem clear to me now. Why would I be brought down here and end up here? There's got to be something more at the end of the rainbow here. It's just like the story of the little girl who found, you know, the parents bought manure to put in the garden. And so in the pile of manure, the girl was so excited and playing in the manure, looking, and her parents says, "Why are you doing this, Sally?" And she said, "Well, there's got to be a pony around here someplace." So in all the manure, having that ability, there's got to be meaning, something beyond just manure, is part of what I was wired to do and I played to. Achiever, getting to action, daily rituals, you know, checklists. And then relator, knowing I wasn't alone. And so playing to my strengths with relator is one of my strengths. I have a fundamental wiring that I'm going to be better doing things with people than on my own. I build cohorts, doing what I'm doing now, reinventing myself. I have a collection of 12 consultants that I brought together 2 years ago, not knowing we were going to go through this, but it's called the Guild. We had a meeting this week, a Zoom meeting of sharing best practices, encouraging one another. That's my model of getting through learning stuff. I built a business development network under the same kind of structure, a barn raising structure, and it's called SWARM, Smart Work and Referral Marketing. I strategically pivoted to 2 areas of the market that furniture dealers were typically not in. One was healthcare. And again, my relator found a healthcare furniture rep who was an expert in the healthcare industry, had sold heavy equipment to them for 30 years, was a trainer in it. And I made a deal. I said, you teach me and our organization about healthcare, we'll make you our exclusive healthcare line. And she had several. The first year we did $400,000, not very much. The second year we did 1.2 million. And after 5 years, we were doing $14 million in healthcare. And then going back to my construction days and using a construction project to get in there, construction product to get in there. So strategically, I shifted to areas that I saw that our distribution typically could not handle. I have background and expertise in construction because of my early days as a project manager at Southwestern Bell in their architecture and construction department. So again, I went back to play to my strengths and reinvent. My circle of 5 has always been strong. I've got personal life mentors, accountability partners that hold me to my best in business and in life. And again, you saw in the SWARM structure and the Guild, I just keep going back to knowing that just like the Fellowship of the Rings, these kinds of journeys are done better with others than on your own. There's a small percent who can do it on their own, but not many. Now, I didn't know about the sleep and recovery portion. I hurt myself in those early years. I was overstressed and it showed up in my family. This time going around, making sure I'm at my best. It's the old mantra of on the flight with the flight attendant, in case of an emergency, you put the mask on yourself first. In other words, you take care of yourself first before you take care of others. You cannot take care of others unless you're taken care of. And meaning and purpose, that was built in my life. You know, it's faith-based. I have a trust in the relationships that I build. And so having meaning and purpose, my family, the greater purpose, changing, helping companies change, looking at the world in a larger scope, how to make a difference or a dent in the universe, so to speak. And then milestones. I'm a natural accomplishment. I'm a Boy Scout. I'm an Eagle Scout. So following that merit badge level, the next levels of accomplishment is second nature to me. So you can see that in my story of post-traumatic growth, I played consistently to my strengths. So as we finalize this in the last few minutes, how only 10% of people will actually act and do what we talked about on their own and even request the video version of this. So one question we can ask ourselves is how can we create a nudge and improve the odds of and we do that by taking first steps. So going back to the very first question, what area do you need to strengthen in your positive mindset? What's the first one you would work at? So make sure you write that down before the end of the day. In terms of playing to your strengths, which one of these would you identify most with? I'm curious about my strengths. I know about my strengths. I'm working on my strengths. I play to my strengths on a weekly basis. I play to my strengths daily. That gives you an idea of a ladder of growth for you. What do I need to do next to strengthen my circle of 5? Do I need a mentor? Do I need a coach? Do I need a cohort to be part of? Who would be in that cohort that we could make and do something together? I'm going to recommend that you read the book Sleep Smarter by Sean Stevens. And then What are you involved in that's bigger than you or will live beyond you in terms of time? We can be so much in that emergency mode and solving our own problems that we forget to do these things. And then the last one, what are some of the leading metrics that I can use to see if I'm on the right path? Did you know that humans are designed to thrive in adversity? It's true. Before COVID, I think we were all running fast and hard, almost mindlessly going through the activities. In 2018, I published the book, The Healthy Workplace Nudge. Our research showed even then that we were on an unsustainable path that would either jeopardize businesses or our economy in terms of the rise of chronic disease. What did COVID show us? 92% of those who have died have either some form of chronic disease or obesity. So what was chronically killing us now is right in front of our faces. We need to become more resilient, healthy, and we need to be able to handle adversity. In this March, I published the book Whole, What Teachers Need to Help Students Thrive. And this research is even more pertinent because it dealt with stress, stress fatigue, burnout, trauma in teachers and in students. So like a forest fire, this pandemic has cleared away some of the bad habits. It gets us down to fundamental routines and relationships that we need to live with that will help us and strengthen us. The fires that are going on in California right now, some of them are hitting redwoods. Redwoods actually do very well in fires, and the forest comes back stronger after all of this brush is cleared out. So if you read through history, groups who support each other actually get stronger going through adversity and get stronger in the meaningful ways on trust with one another, connection, meaning, love. All those things get stronger during these kinds of times and gives me hope and tells me that this path of post-traumatic growth is real and it works. So please do not let the day end until you go through these 6 principles, do inventory, and think about what you're going to do next. I appreciate that you've come, you've invested this time with me. And so we've recorded, we will edit, and we will send you a link. And again, the Google Doc has the outline. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to check in with me. Thank you again, and take care.